both me and my dad noticed. Like, old pennies and bleach. It was weird. I'm an atheist, so I generally don't put a lot of stock into the supernatural. But I gotta admit, that night shook me up. Weird shit. Got some OC spooks to share with you, Anons. Be me, 15-year-old vegan friend at the time, learning how to forage with help from my dad. We're on a hike into the woods. I'm carrying our duffel bag, which currently just has some spring onions in it, talking with Dad when, all of a sudden, he hushes me. What? He tells me he smells something. I take a big long sniff myself, and all I smell is onion and a weird smell like a burning pine needle. The fuck? Definitely not any forest fires around. He starts walking off the trail and I follow him. Why are we off the trail, Dad? I heard from a friend that if you smell that smell, there's wild saffron around. Okay, Pa. We absolutely do not live anywhere near saffron grows, and I don't buy Dad's bullshit. He stops and starts looking around, and I do too. Find this weird looking plant. Looks like a solid green tennis ball on a stalk. Poke it, unfurls, and it takes me a second to realize what was inside of the flower. It fucking blinks at me. My face when it's a fucking human eyeball. Completely gripped by some supernatural terror. Scream. Dad shoots around, sees it too, and is petrified. Before I realize what's happening, he grabs my wrist, and we sprint home delirious. Memory cuts out sometime around when we started running away. Next memory is just us sitting on the porch together. Dad remembers it too. Still what the fuck over it to this day. Any Anons in this thread have stories about chairs in the woods? Not stairs, but chairs. They're somewhat common around where I live. I've never seen a staircase randomly in the wilderness, but I have seen a lot of things like pick related. The one unifying factors with every time I've seen a chair were, number 1, the sounds of the woods, the wind, etc. would completely go out when I was near it. Number 2, the chairs were never damaged and clearly abandoned. They always looked new. And number 3, the chairs were always brightly colored, and in contrast to the woods around them. For example, in the fall, the chairs would be green. In the summer, the chairs would be orange. In winter, the chairs would be black. Is some schizo in my area fucking with me, or is this some actual paranormal happening? The only story I really have of interacting with one of these chairs was throwing a rock at one when I was about 13. A few hours afterwards, when I was home, a rock was thrown back through my window. It spooked the shit out of me, and I was really close to the window at my desk, but I didn't see anyone or anything throw the rock. Yeah, but I think they're used mainly by kids hanging around, or homeless people. I even have 2 stories involving them, albeit one was a chair we brought ourselves, so it doesn't really count. The other one was a bit weirder though, although not strictly in the woods. Have a housing estate built in the 1960s that's in the oddest place. Has no shops or local amenities nearby because it's built in the middle of a trading estate. Sometime in the 1990s, they discover something in the soil has cancer-causing properties, and the big factories nearby don't help. So, they decide to demolish it around 1999. Now it's just this big bit of land that still has all of the roads and footpaths, the streetlights, which are never turned on, and even some of the old fences on people's properties still erected. Other than that though, it's just grass full of rubble. Walk dog there because it's out of the way, and you can do a lap around the old streets. This particular road loops around a big patch of grass full of trees. Don't know if they were back gardens or if it was always grass and trees. There definitely wasn't houses where the trees are because, well, the trees couldn't grow that fast. They're like these big 50-foot things. Pass by with dog who stops and starts sniffing at the edge, then growling. Normally really placid. Could be rats. Take a look. About a foot in from the edge, there's a broken paving stone. In fact, there's a bunch of them that someone has put together to make a little path. Walk down it. Leads to a tree surrounded by bushes, but the bushes have an opening in them, like a fox den, but big enough for a person to get inside. One single couch chair against a tree trunk. Sit in it. Can see the entire road and everything through these little openings that have been made in the bushes. Come back out. You would never know it was there from the road. I think it was some homeless person using it like a lookout. It was still really weird though. Huh. I have something that might be related to this. There's a local legend around where I live. You're supposed to go out to this one cemetery at night, sit on one of the benches. If you wait long enough, you'll see the devil or something. Friend and I go to do this years back. We didn't believe it, of course, but it was Halloween, and we had nothing else going on. As we're waiting in the dark, we hear someone walking through the trees towards us. Oh no, it's the devil. Seriously though, it was kind of scary. Turned out to be a hobo. Guy looked severely unkempt and legit crazy. Had the wild eyes, reeked of booze. His teeth were all rotted out, and he was talking to us way too fucking loud. Started to think the cops might show up, so I tell my friend, come on, let's go. Hobo asks if we're here to see the devil. He tells us there's a haunted chair in the woods. That really works. It's in a little forest nearby that we have to pass to get home. So we thank the guy and take off because we are eager to leave the crazy fucker. But we stop by the little forest, like idiots. Could have easily been some hobo trap or something, but oh well, in we go. The hobo had told us that there were marks on the trees leading the way. And sure enough, there were. They were in some sort of hobo code or something. Little squares and circles and stuff. Anyway, to make a long story short, we find two bodies. Two guys about our age, one heaped over the other, face down in the leaves. Nearby was a chair that looked totally out of place. Looked new and had gold trim, bright green. Realized the whole place is suddenly fucking quiet. Not even a breeze, despite it being Halloween. For some reason, we both back away slowly instead of hightailing it out of there until we can't see the chair anymore. Then, race to the car and head home. Went back later. No chair, no bodies, and the markings on the trees had been scratched out with a knife or something. Well, I live in Montreal for starters. I live on the West Island in Pierrefonds with my girlfriend. The past 2 years, I've been attending college and working at some shitty cafe. Dealing with the shitty customers finally got to me, so I quit my job at the cafe and started looking for a different job. Preferable one where I wouldn't have to deal with assholes constantly. It got to the point where nobody was hiring and I desperately needed money for rent, school, and doing shit socially. I was talking to my best friend about me having a hard time financially, and he told me that if I helped him do this thing, he would split the profit with me. Well, I'm not sure what, but my friend's father had something to do with property. Mostly commercial. Stores, factories, and shit. No homes or anything. What my friend would do is look through his dad's work shit and find out the addresses of these closed down places, what their purpose was, how long ago they closed down, and etc. He had some sort of personal evaluation process, where he would consider whether or not a place was worth looting, and if it was a good time to do so. I went with him to a couple of places to salvage what we could, and sell it to anyone wanting to buy it. There were some pretty valuable finds. It's shocking what people will leave behind. Anyway, things were going well. I was making a decent amount of money doing the occasional quote-unquote job with him. And one day, he finds out about this place between Montreal and Toronto. He drives us over there, and the place looks really fucking scummy. He said it had only been abandoned a year before, but the paint was peeling, there was trash everywhere, and it smelled like piss. We had arrived at around 6 p.m. I guess. Not too early, not too late. A perfect time for Time 6 to upload. And to this day, I'm not sure what the place was. It might have been some sort of refinery or waste management center, or something, because the main reason we were there was to strip the piping. Lots of copper in places like that, and if you get enough of it, it can lead to a decent sum of cash. Well, we take shift waiting outside near my friend's 4x4 pickup, and going inside to strip shit that looks valuable. We'd been there around 2 hours, and we were almost done looking for the place. It was my turn to wait on lookout while my friend cleared out the last of the shithole. It's been about 2 hours at this point, and it was getting dark. My friend sends me a text, saying something along the lines of, "This shit's weird. Park the truck behind the bushes and get over here. Bring something just in case." I assumed he meant bring something in a weapon capacity, so I brought along 2 of the cleaner, smaller pipes and headed to the back of the building. My friend gestures for me to come over, and he looks visibly freaked the fuck out, which is rare because he's normally very level-headed. The last room had around 3 tents set up in it. It smelled like ass, and there were stains fucking everywhere. From the looks of it, it might have been piss, shit, vomit, and some even looked like aged bloodstains. There were what looked like family photos everywhere, but of different families, not just different photos of the same one. Needless to say, we were pretty on edge at that point. but nobody was there, and we were armed up, so we thought we would just look through the tents and get the fuck out. 2 of the tents were repulsive on the inside, but nothing was too bad. The one to the far left, on the other hand, was fucking full of dead animals. The majority of them were cats, mostly strays, but a few of them had collars. There were at least 10 in there, minimum. At that point, it became too much, and we just went to leave. But Dennis saw one more spot he wanted to check out. There was an office near the entrance that was boarded up, and there was a bunch of office shit in there that looked mostly intact. Supplies, a small filing cabinet, a computer to monitor. Wishful thinking because it didn't fucking work anyway. I was really anxious to leave because I was pretty spooked, so I told my friend to go and start up the car. I would search the office and bring the stuff around back. Seeing as I couldn't use the door, I figured I'd break the window. The place was already busted anyway, so I didn't feel too bad about it. I head into the office, and I shit you guys not, there was a fucking dead guy slumped in the corner of the room. I couldn't see him because he was right behind a door that was blocked up. I'm not big into forensics or any of that shit, but it looked like he had been killed a couple of months back. What really freaked me out was that the door was boarded shut from the outside. I'm the one that just broke the window then, and there was a fucking dead guy in there. That must have meant that someone killed him in there, left him, and nailed the door shut with a bunch of scrap wood. Or maybe he killed himself. I don't fucking know. The point is, he didn't lock himself in there. I couldn't take anymore. I sprinted to the car like a little bitch. Threw up in the bushes. Didn't want to do it near the body. I don't know if they can get DNA from that shit or whatever. Worst part is, neither of us called it in, because our fingerprints are all over that place. I know it sounds like horse shit, but it actually happened. It's probably the only too spooky for me thing that'll ever happen in my life, though. Jail was unironically very spooky for me. In jail for 2 weeks. Cellmate was local bong shop owner and former Hell's Angel. Went to jail for fighting a bunch of cops at once. Talked about how he was a clone. Talked about how he went to Jamaica once and met Mila Kunis's clone. Talked about being an intelligence asset. Talked about how power structures at the elite level are both good and evil. Talked about wanting to find and kill the original him after he gets released. Talked about he can fly and walk through walls when he undergoes unspecified and highly classified zone therapy by his intelligence handlers. Talked about needing to forfeit his hand to his handlers so they can clone him. Talked about wanting to kill his handlers because he knows once he himself gets cloned, his clone will be instructed to find and kill him. He doesn't know how long this has been going on for. And that is just some of the fucked up shit he would get into. That's just the stuff I remember. Oh yeah, says his daughter married into Italian mafia and was murdered after he got cloned. Says his mom tried to kill him numerous times. Holy fuck, I just googled him out of curiosity, and it turns out he's fucking dead. What a trip. Anyway, jail is a totally spooky place, Anon. Lots of schizos, weirdos, and scary motherfuckers. You can either grow from it or not. Most don't and just dwell. I realized my relationship with all things was better when I was out. Isolation makes you appreciate the little things again. The car ride out of your tower to court, seeing the trees and open sky, cars, innocents going about their day. Your cell becomes a place of meditation. You read, you write, you sit and think, you exercise, and do yoga. Sober, just enough food to not die, so you're fasting. It's a wonderful mental reset. I used to think the system is designed to keep certain souls down, but then I learned it's a place to put a soul that's basically in timeout, and certain ones don't want to learn and grow from it, so they end up back there. It does break your spirit, though. Not your spirituality, but your sense of wonder and lightheartedness is just so put to halt for so long. Learning to be truly calm takes a while. Being homeless for a week or so after during late summer was super easy, but part of my journey. I was finally with the trees and with the open sky. I could sleep under the stars at a park that was super safe near the burbs. Go and get a coffee and a burger in the morning. Roam around with my dog who just thought we were on a never-ending walk, and loving the attention from strangers. Being reunited with a pet was monumental. It really mentally resets your gratefulness. If even 2 months of jail doesn't give you enough time to rethink priorities and your focus, and to align your mind and soul, then I honestly don't know what to tell you to do. Let me preface this story by telling you that it's been a long time since this happened. While it is a true story, I've had to add some details to make the story flow in a somewhat coherent fashion because I don't remember absolutely everything that happened. Also, my sequence of events may be a little fucked up, but that doesn't change the fact that some of these images are still absolutely frozen. I was hoping my old routine was still around because they came out pretty coherent. Anyhow, when I was somewhere around 8 to 10 years old, I went camping with my Girl Scouts. There were about 12 to 15 of us girls and 2 female leaders. The camp had 6 of those permanent tents, a wooden platform with canvas covering and bunks. 3 to 4 were facing the main part of the camp. 2 were set back a bit in the woods, behind the picnic shelter. Behind those 2 tents was a path that led to the latrines. On the first day, we all picked out our sleeping spots, and our tent was 1 girl short. We spent the rest of the afternoon and evening doing typical Girl Scout stuff, and we spent the evening around the fire, singing and eating marshmallows. The counselors finally made us go to bed around 10 p.m., and when we got to our tent, we used our flashlights to find our bunks and get settled in. It was around this time that we noticed that someone was sleeping in what had been the empty bunk. We didn't think much of this, as it wasn't really unusual for someone to arrive at camp later than the main group. And some of the girls had gone back to the tents before the fire time was over because they were tired. I was a total insomniac, and it's even worse if I'm not in my own bed. This was true even back then. I tossed and turned trying to force myself to fall asleep that night, but it just wasn't happening. After doing this for over an hour, I heard the springs of one of the other beds squeak like someone was getting up. I turned my head to see someone standing up from that previously empty cot. In the very low light, I could just make out the figure of someone standing, pausing for a moment, and then moving toward the front entrance of the tent. The person opened the flap and left the tent. I figured that somebody just needed to go to the bathroom. I still couldn't sleep, so I figured I would wait and see if I could tell who the girl was when she got back. I waited and waited, but it finally drifted off to sleep before the girl came back. When we woke the next morning, we discovered that the bed was empty, and there were no blankets or suitcases near the bed. We talked to the other girls to try to figure out who had been in our tent, but we found out that nobody had come in late, and nobody was missing from their tents. Still, there was always a chance that one of the girls got pissed off at the other girls in their tent and decided to switch for the night. That shit always happens with girls. That night, we spent a long time around the campfire again. At some point during the evening, one of the girls stands up and starts walking towards the woods. The tents and shelter were in the opposite direction. As she got close to the tree line, one of the counselors called out to her to see what the heck she was doing, but she didn't. The counselor called to her another time and then went after her. The other counselor did a head count to try to figure out who was missing. When she got to the end, she stared at us. The other counselor came back so that she couldn't see what was watching, and she gave her a big flashlight. She asked who was missing. The counselor who had been trying to count us said, "Nobody." The counselors even pulled out the roster to check us off, but we were all right there. We were all a little shaken up, so the counselors decided it was time for us to get to the bathrooms and get to bed. Everybody was a little creeped out, so we all went as a group to the bathroom. I washed up and brushed my teeth first. There was a large trough-style sink outside of the actual bathroom, so I was one of the last to actually go to the toilets. And as I was in there, I heard someone moving around in the stall next to me. I'd said something to her, like asking for toilet paper, who knows, but she didn't answer me. I said hello twice, but I still got no answer. When I finished, I knocked on the other stall door, but nobody answered even though I could still hear noises inside, and the door was locked. I went out and told one of the counselors who went back in with me to check it out. When we went in, the door was unlocked, and there was nobody in there. There was no other way out of the bathroom besides the front entrance that I was standing no more than 2 feet from when I was talking to the counselor. The girls that were in the tents that were kind of separated from the others were a little freaked out, and they didn't want to sleep out there, but since they were right next to the counselor's tent, they were reassured and sent to bed. When we reached our tent, we saw again that there was someone in the spare bunk. This time, we figured one of the girls from the far tent had snuck over in spite of what the counselors had said. And, really, do you think any of us had enough balls to lift the blanket off of that bed? We settled in for the night, and I was wishing that I could fall asleep so that I didn't have to be awake alone. Soon enough, I could hear the snores of the other girls, and I was still staring at the ceiling of that tent. Soon enough, I heard the springs of one of the beds squeak again. I opened my eyes and stared at what was supposed to be our vacant cot. There was someone standing up again. I could just make out the figure standing there in the dark. It stood there for about 30 seconds this time, before it moved across the tent and out the flaps. Needless to say, I was pretty much shitting myself, but I was too scared to scream for a counselor because I was afraid that whatever it was would come back. I laid awake for what seemed like hours, staring at the tent flap. It wouldn't open again. I must have fallen asleep at it sometime because I didn't remember. It was morning. Again, the cot was empty. This time, I told the counselors what I had seen, and they asked the girls at breakfast if they had been there. But none of the girls had told the demons. All of the girls in the tent had seen the figure by both nights, but I was the only one who had seen it leave. That day was pretty sedate because everyone was a bit on edge, but we eventually relaxed because of the bright sunshine and fun activities. In order to keep our minds off of that evening, the counselors planned for us to have a bunch of snacks and games around the campfire that night. We had stuff for the little hand pies, banana boats, s'mores, and cinnamon apples. We were all planning on making absolute pigs out of ourselves. The counselors set up all the goodies in the picnic shelter, which was 30 or 40 feet from the campfire ring. The girls would go over and set up their snack and bring it back to the fire to cook it. When I went over, there were a few girls finishing up their snacks, and they left before I had finished up making my banana boat. As I was adding my chocolate chips, there was a huge bang, like a gunshot in the woods, and it was followed by yells that seemed to be coming from different directions. I dropped my snack and went running over to the fire. Everyone had heard it, and some of the girls were near tears. As we sat there, we heard more noises and yells from the woods. The fire was in the middle of a clearing surrounded by woods, and it was an awful feeling to realize how exposed we were, and that anybody could be out in the woods watching us. Instead of going to the latrines that night, a lot of the girls just peed behind the tents, and the girls that were in the far tent were moved into our tents. In fact, we consolidated into 2 or 3 tents by adding cots, and the counselors slept in the 4th tent. We were packed in like sardines, but everyone would sleep easier with more people nearby. We also propped up one of the flashlights on the floor to illuminate the tent as we slept. I actually fell asleep pretty quickly that night because I had had 2 sleepless nights before, but I ended up waking up at some point in the night because of some noises. I opened my eyes, but I found that the tent was now dark. It seemed that the flashlight had died at some point, and as I managed to get my bearings, I realized that the noise I was hearing was the sound of someone getting up out of one of the cots. I nearly stopped breathing as I watched a figure stand. I had to shift my head this time to get a better look. It stood in one place even longer this time, and I couldn't stop watching. It seemed to be leaning over and looking at some of the other girls, and it started to make its way between the cots towards the front flaps. It knew my cough. I snapped my eyes shut and tried to slow my breathing, pretending I was sleeping. I could hear it come even with my bed. It stood there for a long time. I presume it was staring at me, but I wasn't about to open my eyes and find out. Eventually, it moved past me, and I heard the sound of a tent flap. I still kept my eyes shut because I was so afraid that it was trying to trick me. That's when I heard the most god-awful noise I've ever heard. One of the posters in the other thread posted a video of cats talking, and I have to say, that was pretty accurate. But it was much louder. It didn't sound like a human or an animal. The sound seemed to be coming from outside of our tent, but nearby. But all of a sudden, the girls in the next tent started screaming like they were being murdered. Of course, our tent responded in kind, and all of our flashlights were switched on in rapid succession. We could hear the other girls still screaming and running out of their tent. We all stumbled out of our tent to see what the hell was going on. By the time we made it out, most of those girls were near the fire pit, and the counselors were headed for them. From what the other girls were able to relate, they heard the horrible noise outside, and that's when they saw someone, or something, enter their tent. In all of the confusion, nobody saw exactly what had entered, but they had seen the figure open the tent flap. The counselors tried to console the girls, and the one that was particularly brave took a flashlight and headed toward the tent. She searched the tent, but she couldn't find anyone, or anything. We spent the rest of the night all jammed in a group near the fire, and not a single one of us got any sleep. The next morning, we decided to pack up and leave early after one of the counselors discovered that the door to the dining hall had been opened and things had been moved around. Nobody but the counselors had access to the dining hall, and the doors had been padlocked the night before. New Mexican here. Just about everyone I know has seen something fucking weird. My mom and stepdad used to live on the outskirts of Valencia in a piece of shit hut. One day they were out there walking around through a bit of forest, heading home from the store. They lived very far away from the town proper, but were poor as fuck and would cut any corners they could, including gas. The forest in that area was fucking creepy. It was pretty similar to the bosque that surrounds the Rio Grande, since the way home was along an irrigation ditch. It was pretty dark at this point, and they never went out late, but I guess they cut it too short. About half a mile away from their house, they saw this fucking weird creature walking along the opposite side of the ditch. My mom says that it looked like an enormous albino deer, like the size of a really big moose. She told me that its legs were moving at really creepy and unnatural angles. She also said that its face area looked kind of flat, like it didn't have a muzzle. It had a face that almost looked like a elephant's. I watched it walk out for a few seconds. He had released them and immediately fled into the forest. He pretty much bolted home after that. I think that creature may have been a skinwalker, but who the hell knows? My friend told me that one time he and his bud were walking down a ditch late at night in the forest, and that they saw what looked like a black mountain coming out of an empty ditch, and it shapeshifted into a regular-sized house cat with black, fled into the forest. One night, I was walking my dog in the bosque. I stumbled upon this weird-ass structure made of wooden sticks. This isn't unusual in the bosque. A lot of homeless people and campers build them as shelters, but this one was enormous, like the size of an actual house. I walked up to it and tried looking inside of it, but it was pitch black in there. The entrance was a somewhat small hole. A child might have been able to walk in by ducking down, but an adult would have to crawl in on all fours. As I was bending down to inspect it, I suddenly heard a female voice whisper something to my left ear, crystal clear. I couldn't understand her, but whatever she said, was not it. My dog's tail was completely between his legs, and as I turned and sort of speed walked away, he tugged on his leash as hard as he could, making a beeline out of the bosque. I felt like something sinister was watching me the whole time. Even as I exited the bosque, it felt like there was some very evil presence being left behind. I recently talked to a Native American girl at my school, and she mentioned to me that she spoke Tiwa. I asked her to say a few things for me, and now I'm completely convinced that that's the same language that mystery voice spoke to me in. Man hears a foreign language and goes, yeah, that's the ghost, man. That's what it was. Bada boom, bada bing. I found a fucking witch hut, and then this girl at school spoke to me in a weird language. That has to be it. I've never heard of any other language ever in my whole entire fucking life. German? No, witch hut language. I'm gonna bump this with a personal story for all of you. I had just graduated, and like most college students, I had no money or job. Me and a few of my friends decided to go in on a shitty apartment together, just until we get on our feet. Find this great 3-bedroom for cheap, but the landlord was extremely suspicious. No contract was ever signed, just required money up front every month. The apartment itself was nice, but very old, like something out of the 1920s. except for this one massive part of the hallway closet that looked like it was recently plastered over. Just an awkward white spot that nobody tried to hide or paint over. We asked the landlord about it, and he just said it was from recent renovations. We knew that was complete bullshit, but we were desperate, and the place was cheap. Cut to a month later. We're all settled in and doing fine. One night, we're watching TV when there's a knock at the door. Two massive fucking Russians are standing at our doorstep. I mean like 6 foot tall, prison muscle jacked guys. One was wearing a sailor hat and tank top, which looked tremendously gay. But at this point, none of us were laughing. They asked about some guys, saying they owed them money. We told them that we've been living there for a month, and that we don't know the men that they're looking for. The Russians get visibly confused, but don't push the issue much further. Instead, they get in their car and just sit there watching our apartment for several hours. Now, this apartment was in a super shitty neighborhood. We're talking boarded up houses, drug dens, drive-by shooting kind of shitty. So nobody cared or took notice of some suspicious guys sitting in their cars for hours like us. Eventually, we all got freaked out enough to call the cops. How was the landlord suspicious? And how did you know what they said about the wall's bullshit? The landlord was suspicious because he didn't make us sign a lease or contract or anything, just wanted the money up front. Also, he said that plastered hole was from renovations, when clearly nothing else in the apartment looked new or renovated. Anyway, of course, once the single cop showed up, the Russians flew off. We explained to him what happened, but he said there wasn't much he could do other than tell officers to keep a lookout for the car. The whole time we were talking, he kept looking around the apartment nervously. And finally, right before he left, he asked us, "Do you guys live here by choice?" We were a little freaked out by the question, but told him we were just college kids looking for someplace cheap. He asked if we knew the story behind this place, and when we answered no, he told us what he knew. Apparently, a bunch of illegal immigrants had been living in this apartment previously, but had all been deported. Somehow, they had gotten wondering that the immigration police were coming mere minutes before they came. One of them had somehow managed to get into the spaces behind the walls and hide there for several hours as the police searched the place. The police made the hole in the closet trying to get to him, but he had escaped and was still at large. Of course, after telling us that horrific story, the cop left, and we pretty much just stayed up all night, afraid that a bunch of Russians were going to murder us. Next month, we confronted our landlord, saying we knew about the illegals, and he begged us not to move out. We were probably the first tenants in years that had paid rent on time and in full each month. Anyways, none of us had any better options at the time, so we were kind of stuck anyway. So, we stayed. Next post is when things started getting batshit crazy. Another couple of weeks passed, and neither of us had seen the Russians again. So we were starting to feel more relaxed again, except for one of my roommate's girlfriend. She didn't live there, but stayed with us several times a week. One morning, she asked if we had heard shuffling and scratching at night. We were all heavy sleepers, so we just wrote it off as typical odd noises in an old place. Only a few nights later, I had fallen asleep on the couch watching TV. When I finally awoke to head to my own bed, I also heard the scratching. It sounded like a fucking rat burrowing in our walls and ceilings. There would be several seconds of furious scratching, and then what sounded like pieces of wood or debris falling or settling. The next day, I told my roommates, and that night we all stayed up together and heard the scratching and skittering once again. We all concluded it was rats and called the landlord to hire an exterminator. The asshole took several weeks to follow through, so for the time being, we just ignored the scratches, seeing as they only happened at night, and most of us could sleep through it anyway. That, and none of us had actually seen any rats. Another night, we were all sleeping peacefully when a loud boom woke us all up suddenly. It sounded like someone had fucking dropped an anvil on our ceiling. It was that loud. We all searched the place, but there were no cracks or broken items, or any signs of damage whatsoever, so we just ignored it and went back to bed. After the big boom, we went almost 2 weeks without incident, but during that time, the apartment started smelling terrible. At first, we just thought it was us. I mean, you had 3 guys living in one place. Of course, it's a little rank, right? We even spent one full day cleaning and washing everything, but the smell kept getting worse. It got to the point where walking into the apartment was like walking into a public restroom, where someone had taken a dump and let it sit all day. At this point, we just harassed our landlord with endless phone calls until he came himself. Upon entering our place, he almost puked. Finally, the next day, an exterminator came. The scratches had stopped, but one of my roommates made a video of it with his cell phone to show the guy. He said it sounded like rats, or possibly a possum, but said that usually they don't stink up a place as bad as ours. Now, we lived on the top floor of this apartment, and the exterminator wondered if we had access to the attic. We told him no, and that we had never been up there, because the only way to get in was a tiny square door in the ceiling of our hallway that was always locked. The exterminator said he would get access to it from the landlord and return in a few days. Next day, I come home from work early, and to my surprise, I see those two fucking Russians waiting in their car again. I was really starting to get sick of all the crazy shit going on in the apartment, so I got my courage up and went right up to their window and knocked. They rolled the window down, and I asked why they kept watching us. They said they knew I was lying about their friend. I screamed that I didn't know the guy who owed them money, and said if they didn't leave us alone, I would call the cops. In hindsight, I was probably really lucky they didn't shoot me or something, but the driver did give me a stone pants-shitting glare. Before driving off, he only said two things. I saw a climb up to your apartment. We'll be back for our money. Suffice it to say, I freaked the fuck out and told both my roommates. For the next 48 hours, we acted like morons. One of us staying up to watching shifts at night for safety. Finally, the exterminator came back with a key to the attic. We were all very on edge, so it didn't help when the exterminator looked into the attic for not even a minute before climbing back down and telling us to leave immediately and to call the police. We did so, and only when the police came did the exterminator finally say what he'd seen. As you've probably guessed by now, the missing Russian had died in our attic, which was where the smell came from. Apparently, he had been living there for a while and using some makeshift tunnel in the spaces behind the walls to get in and out without us noticing. We never got the final word on how exactly he died, but I did learn it was slow and painful. The thing that still really fucks with me is why he never cried for help. He knew we were right there under him, but instead of seeking help, he just lay there, dying. Obviously, we had all had enough after that, and moved out within the next week. Our landlord actually got arrested, but we never really found out what for. The day I was moving all my stuff out, I noticed the police had left the attic door unlocked, and I wanted to go up and see this place for myself during the day. It was very eerie. The space was tiny and cramped, barely enough room to walk crouched down. You could see the insulation on the walls. The bed was nothing more than a ratty sleeping bag, and the only source of light were a couple flashlights. Wrappers and empty cans of food were just littered everywhere, along with plastic drink bottles. A garbage bag was filled with some dirty clothes, and it looked like the cops had taken or confiscated anything else up there. The most fucked up thing, though, were the tiny little holes drilled in the floor. There were 3 spread out across the space. When I bent down to look, you could see our living room, kitchen, and bathroom pretty clearly. I don't know if the holes were just so he could make sure we were asleep, or if he was just actively watching us. Next to one hole was a clawed up section of floor with some blood, like he was just scratching with his fingernails nonstop. I feel terrified thinking that he was dying and couldn't speak for some reason, and maybe his scratching was a call for help. I'll never know, but it had really fucked me up to this day. I might have something fresh for my girlfriend, unless she's making shit up. Bianon's girlfriend. Yes, female. Live in Central Europe. Small town next to a larger city. Not far away from a local highway. Get a lift to your place from Anon by car. Say see you to each other. Girlfriend stumbles upon family members ever coming back at the party. Everyone is home. People are going to bed. Girlfriend decided to stay up late and watch some scary shorts on TikTok. Yeah, I know. Suddenly, she hears some weird noises going on. It's encapsulated, So the thing in question had to get inside, somehow. And it stays closed because of wild hogs and foxes anyway. She described those sounds as screeching sounds of a big bird, but somewhat high-pitched. Nothing like a wild hog, which is really common here, or cats fighting or meowing. It even activated a movement detector. Light bulb turns on if someone or something is close and big enough, so it had to be inside of the dumpster. It lasted for around 30 seconds, with pauses. Girlfriend could hear how it was walking, but that walk was more like a rustling. After it stopped, everything went really silent. Bros, what the fuck? Is some fucking skinwalker stalking my girl? Do I need to call Fox? Growing up in shitty town in the vicinity of Memphis, probably 15 when this happens. Hanging out with a greasy metalhead friend of mine, and smoking a few blunts. He lives in a much more urban area than I do. I live in the suburbs. It's getting late, and I need to head home. He says he'll walk with me because it's a bad neighborhood, and he's tall and wide enough to probably scare off any friend that pulls a knife on us. Stop for a second because friend needs to call his mom and tell her where he's at. Windowless van pulls up by us. By windowless, I mean it was supposed to have glass in the windows, but the panes had been removed. Can't really see inside. Smells faintly of piss and cigarettes. Anorexic-looking chick leans out of a front seat window. Hey! Can tell she's on something. Her eyes are looking in two different directions, and she's covered in sores. Wanna party? No thanks, bro. I'm good. She stops for a second, going from smiling to scowling at me, and panting like a dog. Gruff voice from the van tells her, Jesse, get back here, you fucking bitch. She whimpers, then leans back in, and I think goes into the back. Notice that whoever is in the front seat is staring at us. Can just barely see the streetlights glinting off of his eyes, like with cat eyes. Can see from his silhouette that he has to be fucking jacked. Immediately become aware of just how easy it would be for this guy to subdue my friend and grab me, grab friend's arm, and start walking. Van stays there. Look back and I swear to God, the guy is still looking at me. We go through some alleys to get away. Almost home now. We were power walking the entire time, and I needed to stop because being out of shape and mildly stoned was making it hell to breathe. Sit on the curb, on the outskirts of the urban area now. Notice, like probably a block down, that same van is now parked by the curb. Watch this young-looking girl, couldn't have been older than 13, get into the back. I swear to God, I could feel the fucking driver stare at me as the van flew off. My face went. Next day, there's a few missing persons case on the news. That face one of them is the anorexic chick I saw, and one of them looks like the 13-year-old girl that I saw. That face I could have been one of them. And you didn't fucking call anyone? Here's a story about my attempt to photograph a crawler. I live in a small town in the northern part of the US. Around December of 2022, there had been crawler sightings in my town. It got to the point where some people were seeing 2 to 3 at a time, every few nights. Don't believe the sightings at first, until one night, I'm driving back from my shitty wagey job. Spot one walking along the road into the forest. It walked like both feet were nailed to a plank of wood. It was also gaunt, with long, spindly limbs. The thing was naked, and had white/gray skin. Didn't get a good look at its face. I doubt it was a homeless person or a drug addict, due to how cold it was that night. Anon doesn't know what a homeless person is. Decided to try and get a photo. Come onto X, and ask for tips on cryptid photography. Get some good pointers about getting good camouflage and equipment. Best tip was to ask local hunters for advice. There are a few people who hunt for fun in my town, but most of them go to hunting preserves outside of the town. There are 2 dudes who do know how to hunt and have a good understanding of the area. I'll call them Martin and Jake. Martin is 30-ish, kinda shifty and quiet. He's moved to the area back in 2016, after getting in trouble with some of the law enforcement down south. He now spends most of his days walking aimlessly around the town, when he's not drunk in his RV. Jake is 63 years old, and has lived in the town since before most of the roads were properly paved. His father used to take him hunting in the woods when he was a child. Both men know a lot about the area, and agreed to help me get a few photos. They tell me they want to wait for the storms to subside and for the snow to melt a little. Decide that February 28th would be a nice date to shoot for. Agree. And during this time, they teach me useful stuff like how to avoid detection by fox walking and making camo out of dead foliage. Slowly, sightings of the crawlers dwindle, and by late January, there was only a few sightings every 2 weeks. Weather was also pretty bad, so we moved the trip to the 1st of March. Day of the trip comes around. We head into the woods. Jake has his father's old Garand. Oh, here we go. Martin has an old beat-up Winchester shotgun. We hike into woods and for the first few hours, swapping stories and chatting about life. Nothing too bad happened that first night. In the morning, we stumble across something odd. It was a wolf, or what was left of it. It stunk to high heaven, and its head and stomach were the only parts left. The rest of the day, we are more alert. No more fun stories after that. Martin wants to head back. It was still pretty cold too, and the previous night had been pretty bad. We decide to cut the trip short by 2 days, and just spend one more day out. Jake says we should head to one of the creeks, where a few animals usually congregate around. While we're walking to the creek, and it is downright nauseating. Martin starts getting vocal about wanting to head back. Jake also is starting to show concern. At this point, I felt maybe digging around in crawler territory wasn't the best of ideas. We decide that it would just be best to head back to town and come back in the summer. On the way back, Jake says he knows a shortcut to where the van is. He says that there is this old stone path that leads us to the van. We follow, but something starts to feel off. My vision seems to feel off. The best way I can describe it is when an old camera struggles to catch up with rapid movement, and everything is glitched. Martin starts saying something about his feet burning, and Jake is basically dead quiet the whole time. Sun is starting to head down, and we are nowhere near the van. Ask Jake if we can sit down, and tell him how my vision seems fucked. Jake doesn't respond. He just keeps walking forward. I ask if he's alright. No response. Martin asks Jake if something is wrong. No response. My head feels like it is on fire at this point, and I just sit because I just want the pain to stop. Martin starts yelling at Jake, but Jake just keeps moving forward. Finally, Martin shoves Jake to the ground. Jake asks what happened. He says he doesn't know what's going on. My headache was starting to subside a little, but the sun was finally dipping down below the horizon. Jake asks where we are. Martin asks Jake what he remembers. He says he remembered us heading to the creek, and then everything after was a blank. We don't know what to do, and we start to panic. The sun goes down, and it's pitch black. This was the first time I realized how dark the night is, without any streetlights or cars. It was like staring at a wall. Could only see like 3 feet in front of me. It was also so cold that it felt like needles were being shoved into my face. Fumble through my bag and pull out a flashlight. While searching for a flashlight, I hear Martin trying his best to bring Jake up to speed. Find it, and before I can say anything, Martin goes quiet. Jake goes quiet too. For 10 seconds, it is completely quiet. No animals, no wind, not even the sound of snow being crunched by footsteps. The smell hits my nose, and it completely overtakes my nose. Start to cough, then look at Jake and Martin. They are pointing at something. Look to where they're pointing, and see something white pass, cut through a tree. Martin screams, and points his Winchester at something. Jake starts to back away from Martin, and towards me, point the flashlight in the general direction of where Martin is pointing his gun. It's a crawler. Martin tries to fire his gun, but nothing happens. He tries again, and this time, something does happen. The fucking gun explodes. Birdshot flies everywhere, and Martin falls to the ground. Ears are ringing. Everyone is screaming. Catch a glimpse at the thing. It's taller than any man I've ever seen. Skin is gone and colorless. Limbs are slim, way too weak to support this thing. Face is almost featureless. Almost. I say almost because the eyes are the main feature. Black, like a shark. Though its eyes. Staring, and met with those eyes. It was like my mind went blank, and every thought was instantly replaced with pure negative energy. It was like staring into eternity. It was one of the worst feelings, and I am struggling to put it into words of what it was like. Loud bang fills the air. Jake has started firing the rifle and tells me to drag Martin. Martin is on the ground, writhing in agony, cursing and screaming about everything and everyone. Birdshot and bits of metal are embedded in his face, hands, and arms. Help him get onto his feet as I hear a ping. The thing is gone now, and it's just us. The wind starts picking up again. We drag Martin for about 40 minutes, trying to reach a road. We are lucky enough to stumble upon a road, and a car picks us up. Martin had to get a few bandages and stitches. It's been a few days since the incident, and Martin got discharged from the hospital a few days ago. Paid for his hospital bills and tried to talk to him. We talked for only a few minutes about what we saw. The last thing he had told me was that he was taking his RV and heading to the southwest. He left 2 days ago. Jake, on the other hand, plans on seeing his family in Florida in a few days. He gets uncomfortable every time I ask about what happened that night. And that's the story of how I saw a crawler and vowed to never go looking for cryptids. This shit's gonna be a short green text. It's been years since this happened. 10 at the time. At home with grandma and cousin. Shit house without Wi-Fi. Hungry as fuck. Thought about heating up some food. Got some rice and sausages. Put food in microwave. Suddenly, see a reflection of kid in white clothes. Kid moves very fast. Thought nothing of it. Finish eating. Doing dishes. Grandma comes in the kitchen. I asked why cousin's running around. She said he wasn't, and that he's been sleeping. Asked for white clothes. Grandma said that he was wearing red clothes at the time. Got spooked and went back to my room. Later on, Grandma explained in the house that there's some unnatural shit that happened. Forgot what she said though. It's been 8 years. So here's a few brief spooks that I think are connected. Starting from where it began. Be me, nude and in bed. Burning up cause there's no AC. And the ceiling fan annoyed. Why I'm naked to begin with. Can't sleep, so I try to entertain myself, to lull my overly active mind to the dreamland. Been reading X a lot, so naturally my mind gravitated to the supernatural, and succubi in particular. Dream up a scenario of meeting one, as I soak my sheets in sweat. After a few minutes of polluting my mind with lewd daydreams, hear, clear as day, a husky feminine sigh, and feel warm breath on my ear. Hold upright, heart pounding. Turn on light, search room, get dressed, and lie awake in a panicked state for hours. Fall asleep, eventually chalk it up to an overactive. It happens again the next night, but this time, I feel a hand brush up against my cheek and wait to the other side of the bed. Lay still, scared shitless. Don't sleep that night. Burn incense. Don't sleep nude. Occupy mind with readings of old horror stories instead of fantasy. Nothing happens for a few months. Until, a few days ago, when I was struggling to sleep and put on some podcast about Bigfoot to drift off to sleep to. Except, as I finally got comfortable, I heard and felt a sigh in my ear, much harsher and more irritated sounding. Eyes shoot open, spot a snow-white face with black hair, and big staring eyes looking at me from the edge of my bed, leaning from behind the bookcase I use as a backboard and wall. Nearly spit out my heart. I'm so frightened. Nothing's happened since then, but I can feel a presence whenever I'm near my room, or I'm in it in the dark. Not even the first time I've seen shit in this house, but it's the first time I've heard and been touched by one of these things. Mediterranean spooks. Creepy stuff from Mediterranean countries. I'll share what I have. Can keep them coming if you're interested. Be some random farmer about 80 plus years ago. Summer night, outside with the cattle and a couple other farmers. Chilling and having something to eat. Smoking and talking about random stuff. Hear faint sounds in the distance. Think nothing of it. Sounds increasing in volume and can be distinguished now. Faint voices and whispers. Put out the fire because we don't want any issues. Partner grabs his hunting rifle. See something red glowing in the woods. Looks like a big group of people in a straight line. Rifle partner drops the weapon and tells us to hide. It's dangerous to be outside because of civil war, so We don't argue with him, and move to a dip next to the dirt road that goes through the forest. Voices get closer, but can't distinguish what they're saying. There's silence all of a sudden. We're holding our breath, crouching. Rifle guy is praying in silence. I move a bit so that I can get a clear view of the road. See group of people. I call them people, but they're not people. More like faint shadows. The kind of thing you're not able to see if you're looking directly at it, and have to use the corner of your eye. Red lights we saw before are candle lights. Go back to the group in the eerie silence. Rifle guy has his eyes closed. Other dude is confused, but terrified. Start hearing same voices as before, but it's coming from a different part of the forest. Rifle guy loses it and starts sobbing. Can hear sounds again, everything going back to normal. Rifle guy tells us to wait for a bit. After a few minutes, he stands up, grabs rifle, and starts heading back to the village. Refuses to tell us anything about that night. Other guy tells me he thinks he knows what it was, but isn't sure. Because of what it could be, he prefers not to say. Rifle guy falls ill a couple days after that night, and ends up dying in a week. This past Christmas, I was chatting with a former commando online. He told me he had several spooky encounters in the woods, and I asked him to type them up for me with as much detail as possible. I know X hates inner-woods stories and longer stories these days, but I enjoyed reading them. I will share them here in the hopes that others will enjoy them as well. Here goes. I'm a military vet, not in the United States. I've seen combat, trained information gatherer and scout. During summer 2016, I began making semi-regular patrols around my property to catch as many tweakers as I could after I had caught them using my property as a shortcut between labs and crack houses on the road. I captured a few war trophies, like wallets, phones, or hats, but one especially hot day, I was exploring an area I had not visited before. While there, I found an absolutely enormous old-growth softwood tree. Thing was massive, easily 15 feet around at the base. It had good coverage if I wore good camouflage, and offered a good view of a highway that the tweakers used. One especially hot afternoon, I was patrolling when I sat down at the base of the tree and rested a moment. I leaned back, drank from my canteen, and closed my eyes for a bit. When I did that, the wind picked up and I began to shiver from the unseasonable cold. I opened my eyes, turned to my right, and saw it. There was a human silhouette, about 30 feet in the air. It was totally transparent, about the size of an average adult man, and hovered perfectly still in midair, in front of the older trees behind it. It was clear enough that I could see the trees behind it perfectly. All that was there was the outline of a man, without legs. It just trailed off into nothingness. It was like reality was embossed around the shape of this thing, and I could feel it was just staring at me. A slow, creeping horror came over me as I stared at it. I blinked, and it stayed in place. I blinked again, and it still didn't disappear. I felt paralyzed with uncertainty and fear. It was clear that I was in this thing's home, and I was not welcome. I sat up, and slowly, I looped the shoulder strap of my backpack over my arm, grabbed my rifle with my other hand, and in an instant, I was on my feet, turned away, and running the opposite direction, while the wind kicked up again. Even in direct 98-degree sunlight, I still felt as cold as in winter. Trees shook, leaves fell around me while I sprinted through the swamp, back to familiar territory, until I realized I was totally lost. I ran in the direction I'd come from familiar territory, but I was nowhere that I'd been before, in a clearing in the swamp. I took cover behind a fallen tree, and began appraising the situation. I was still alive, and far as I could tell, I was still thinking rationally. I knew the direction I came from, and relative to that, I had a rough idea of where the road was. The creek was still present, and if I followed it far enough, I would eventually find where I came from. Slowly, I began exploring the road. I found a small trail behind. Where I was, the tree was blocking the exit from view perfectly. I still felt like I was being watched, and I wasn't moving. But I followed the trail. I was only about to get to the familiar grounds when I began running. I finally found my way back to my property. It took me a long time to return to the road. I never wanted to. Eventually, and soon after arriving, the wind kicked up again, just as violent as last time. This time, I began and using advice from the dumbass wimpy pagans that I used to know. My father had spoken to the woods, that I had no idea what that thing I saw was, and that I had no quarrel with it. But it does not have my permission to follow me home, nor do I follow the way that I never told that area multiple times afterwards. I never had any other such experiences, but I made forest light. I swear it's a forest near a myth. They suggested I leave an autumn, something without any artificial, like plastic or rubber, type of components. So I left a wooden figurine and a bagel box. Shit. Now I found this guy's stories and nice reads just before bed. So here's another. So, when I was in high school, my family managed a burger shack. It wasn't much more than a grill, 2 fryers, and a cash register and a horse trailer. But we had a good fan base in our town for a minute. In our town was a local schizoid that we would call Roy. In my parents' generation, Roy was a big boy. He was the first to bring our high school football team to state. He was popular, he was handsome, and he had no shortage of girlfriends when he was young. But all of that changed after his brother died in a murder. That drove Roy into a long, unbelievably dark spiral that he never fully left again. He ended up diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia